Okay, let's take a look at the Acumatica Commerce Connector. So the Commerce Edition is essentially a Commerce Connector. It includes a Commerce Connector, which makes it possible to connect Acumatica to e-commerce platforms. When you enable the Commerce Edition, right now, there are mainly two pieces that are added to the system. The first is the Commerce Connector, which you see this new tab here in the left sidebar, and these are all the tools included in the Commerce Connector. We'll go into more detail about this in a couple minutes. The other thing that's added inside stock items, when we open up a stock item, and I'll go find my favorite product. Now, stock items have a lot of information in them, but what is added to the stock items are fields related to e-commerce. So the first thing is there's an e-commerce tab that's added. This e-commerce tab controls much of the customer's experience inside the e-commerce platform. For instance, you can control the visibility of the product. You can set it to visible, featured, or invisible. Invisible means that the product is in the e-commerce database, but the public consumers can't find it. It's not something that's in the navigation or easily accessible. Availability refers to how the inventory in the ERP impacts the customer experience on the e-commerce site. So the different options, you can choose to use the store default, which I'll show you in a couple seconds. That's essentially the settings, just like these, that are set for all products in the database. You can tell the system to track quantity. Maybe you don't want to track quantity. Maybe you want to set all the products to pre-order. What that means is that the products are available on the site, but there's a message that lets the customer know that maybe this item won't be available for a certain period of time, or you can set the product to disabled. In addition to this, if you choose track quantity, this also allows you to control what to do when that quantity reaches zero. Now, something to keep in mind, in BigCommerce and other e-commerce platforms, you can tell the system what your zero inventory is. So I've met prospects who, when their inventory reaches, let's say 25, that's when they essentially want the system to consider it zero inventory. Okay, that's a configuration inside BigCommerce, and what we have built here will respect that setting. Okay, so what happens when you reach that level? Let's just say zero quantity. Well, in some cases, you don't want to do anything. Just keep taking orders. Maybe you run a business where you know more products are coming all the time. So any order that comes in today, you know you'll be able to ship it out quickly. You could also set it to disable the product. So when the quantity reaches zero, just disable the product page. Don't make this product available for purchase any longer. And you can also set it to pre-order, which again means that the product is going to be available for purchase, but it will also include a message that you get to configure inside BigCommerce. And that message could say something like, we're currently replenishing, will typically ship within 5 days, something like that, okay? In addition to those settings, you also have control over your search engine optimization fields. This includes your page title, and this isn't the page title like the description or the page title you see on the page. This is the page title that is included in the header of the HTML. And if you know about search engine optimization, you're likely aware that this is one of the most important fields regarding search engine optimization. Search engines like Google consider these keywords to be, what you consider the most important, okay? There's also a field for meta keywords, again, related to search engine optimization, and the description. The description is what you see in Google when you do a search. So in this case, we search for Nikon cameras. This is one of the results, and this is that short description that you see. Again, keywords within that description are very important. This field here, the search keywords field, these are actually keywords that you're telling BigCommerce to index in relation to this product. So these are the keywords that people on your website or on the website would be searching for, and you want to return this result. Keep in mind, this is really helpful for organizations or in industries that sell products to many different audiences. Okay, so I see this sometimes with the auto industry, where here's an auto product, and 10 different people may refer to that product in 10 different ways. But you need one title to include, and it's probably going to be the technical, the actual title of the product. But if you know what those other 10 keywords are that people use, you can insert them here, and then BigCommerce will index that term along with this product. So then when somebody goes to your site and they search for that keyword, this product is one of the ones that will be revealed. Okay, and then the last thing is custom URL. So in search engine optimization, having keywords in your URL has been known to help your rankings. So some search marketers like to have control over that URL. You can manage this here, and it will change the path of the product details page in BigCommerce. Now, if we move over to the media URLs, here is where you can add images and videos. Now, we can also add images in the attributes tab, just as you would with any other stock item. The difference is the images that you're adding here are located on another server. So we've met customers and prospects that want to host all their images, let's say on an S3 server. And maybe they have some image management software installed on that server, and it's just a better place for them to manage those images. As long as the URL to those images is publicly accessible, you can enter the URL here, tell the system we need this to be an image, and then it won't pull the image into the ERP database. It'll just map that image over to BigCommerce so it appears on the product details page. And you can do the same thing with videos. So you can insert your YouTube or Vimeo URL in these fields. And then inside BigCommerce, there's a field where videos can be added, and they'll be rendered on the product page. Okay, as I mentioned before, in the attributes tab, this is where you can upload images to Acumatica. It's using the standard feature for uploading the images. You can add as many images as you like, and those images will be exported over to BigCommerce and appear on the product details page. The other thing here that's added, it's not really added. These are tools that utilize the connector. So the attributes area can utilize the connector, and the sales categories. So inside BigCommerce, you're required to have product categories for each of the products. And the connector will map sales categories to product categories inside of BigCommerce. So technically, inside of Acumatica, you could build out your entire product menu structure with hierarchy, and then assign products to one or more sales categories here inside the ERP. And then when the product is exported to BigCommerce, it'll be assigned to the corresponding product category, so that when the user goes to the main menu and they're drilling down into electronics and then cameras, this product will appear in those categories. When it comes to attributes are obviously associated with specific items. So these are not terms, obviously, these are not terms that we would just include by default inside the ERP. These are terms that are created by the customer, or whoever's implementing the system. And you can have lots of attributes on a product, but if you needed this information to flow over to the e-commerce site, for instance, pixel size and wide angle lens size, this is information that a buyer might need in order to make a decision. So what you can do is use the connector. I'll go into more detail about this in a second. You can use the connector to map these fields to custom fields inside of BigCommerce. And when this information is pushed into those custom fields can actually be used for things like faceted search inside of BigCommerce. So this is very helpful. So the information here will appear on the product details page, but it can be used for other things as well. And like I mentioned before, you don't have to map 100% of your attributes. You're doing this individually. So if you had 10, or in this case 4 attributes, what we have set up is only 2 of those going over to the details page, which I can show you here. Okay, so everything that we're looking at, the product description, which is the title, here are those attributes I was just talking about, obviously the SKU information, the images. The last thing to show you is the description. Oh, here are those videos that I mentioned before too. So on websites, obviously your descriptions are going to have styling to them. And inside of Acumatica, if you go into the description window, there is a WYSIWYG up here, which stands for what you see is what you get, where you can manage the rich media. So we can add headers to text, we can add bullets, you can add links, lots of different things you can do here. And this will export as HTML into BigCommerce so that it appears as you expect it to. Okay. Now, something I want to mention about descriptions. We've definitely met customers who they want to manage things like their description inside of the e-commerce platform. And this happens usually with bigger organizations that have a marketing department, and maybe that marketing department is very familiar with, in this case, BigCommerce, or maybe they're using an add-on app like Shogun, which is a popular app for managing product descriptions in BigCommerce, and it's also used in Shopify. Maybe they use that to manage the descriptions. We'll go into this in more detail, but it is possible to unmap fields. So everything that I was showing you up to this point, it's all default settings. But if you wanted to tell the system, don't take the description from the ERP and send it to BigCommerce, it's possible to do that. It's just a handful of clicks. And in that case, maybe you're using the ERP to manage a description, which is good for the internal business, but it's not marketing appropriate. In that case, you could manage all your internal information here, unmap it to BigCommerce, and then manage the description over in BigCommerce. And then one more example that I want to share. So I've definitely talked with customers who, in their ERP, the description that they use here, which matches the product title here, the description that they're using is not appropriate for marketing. It's a description that internally everybody uses, but their customers, it wouldn't make any sense to their customers. So in that case, what they can do inside the e-commerce tab, they could add an additional field here just by adding a custom field inside of the ERP. And they could, let's say, call that marketing title. And that marketing title field would just be a string. And then we can use the entities window, which I'll show you in a little bit. We can use that entities window to map this new custom field to the product title inside of BigCommerce. All of this can be done by a non-developer. Everything that I'm talking about when it comes to configurations, the goal was to create a system that didn't require a developer to make these kinds of changes. Okay, so that's everything about the product. Other things, obviously, the price information comes over, like I said, title, everything else. But those are the fields that get added with the Commerce Edition. So then let's jump over to the Commerce tab. So all the tools that we have here are for managing the connection between BigCommerce and Acumatica, but then also managing the data flow, configuring the data flow, and then creating those new fields. Okay, so let's start with the BigCommerce stores window. So this is where you actually establish the connection between Acumatica and BigCommerce. The first thing to point out is notice that when we choose a store name up here, if we were creating a new store, you have the ability to select, which, essentially what this means is that you can add as many BigCommerce stores as you like. You can take this same ERP and connect it to dozens of stores if you wanted to. And everything that I'm about to show you, these are all default settings for this specific store. So if you were selling to different audiences and it was important for you to manage incoming and outgoing information in different ways with all of those different stores, you could just set unique default settings for all of them. Okay. This first tab is the connection settings. This is where you're simply dropping in your API keys from BigCommerce and also the WebDAV information. As soon as you insert this information, you can test the connection and the system will be connected. But the other configurations are required in order to get data flowing back and forth. The next tab is the entity settings. So these are all the entities that are mapped between the two systems: customers, stock items, sales orders. And you have the ability to turn these on and off. Okay. This really comes in handy a couple different ways. First, when you're going through implementation, maybe you only want to synchronize one entity at a time. Like you just want your customers going back and forth. That's fine. I've seen that before. The other thing too is when live customers have data flowing back and forth between the two systems. Let's use the use case where a customer is in the process of updating all of their stock items inside the ERP, and there's an approval process and multiple people are involved. They have the ability to uncheck this box next to stock items, which is essentially just going to disconnect BigCommerce stock items and Acumatica stock items until they turn it back on. So they can make all those changes inside the ERP, and once they have approval, then they can turn this back on and synchronize the two systems. So it's a little bit of safety insurance for them. Okay. In addition to activating the different entities, you also have the ability to control the direction that the data is flowing. And what I mean by that is, for instance, with stock items are really only to be exported from ERP over to the e-commerce platform. The system is not built to import products to the ERP without an import scenario. But sales orders are different. Sales orders, maybe you're a B2C seller and you only want your e-commerce orders to flow into the ERP, and that's 100% of what you need. So in that sense, you would just use the import settings. But maybe you're a B2B customer, and not only do you want online orders to appear in the customer's record in BigCommerce, but you also want offline orders to export out to BigCommerce. So then when the customer logs in, they're able to see all of their orders online and offline. Okay. In that case, you could use bidirectional. I don't have a use case for export, but if that was important to you, you would be able to use the export feature only as well. Okay, so we're going to set that back to bidirectional. And that's the case over all of the different entities. You also have the ability to manipulate which system is considered local. What that means is the primary system is the source of truth. So stock items, source of truth. In this case, in this relationship between BigCommerce and the ERP, the sales order source of truth is the e-commerce system. It's sending all those orders in. Now that doesn't mean that the e-commerce system is used for managing all the sales orders. It just means that the sales orders in this relationship are being created inside BigCommerce and then imported into the ERP. Okay, and then all of the settings related to the real-time status, these are managed in another window, but you can see if they're running or not here. And then this last area, this is for sync immediately. And what this, if this is enabled, I should explain. So the Commerce Connector is essentially a layer that sits on top of the ERP. And that layer can hold data without importing it into the ERP database. Meaning, imagine a sales order is coming into the connector. You can configure the system so that that sales order just sits in the connector until you're ready to import it into the ERP database. So in that case, sync immediately would be turned off, meaning you don't want this to sync immediately. You want the sales orders to come into the connector. You want to be able to go to the sync status window, which I'll show you in a couple minutes, and review all of those orders before you synchronize them with the ERP database. Okay? If you have this enabled, it doesn't mean that every single time there's a synchronization, it will happen immediately. You still have a level of control over that, so you can manually force it to just come into the connector and then into the ERP, or vice versa. But by enabling sync immediately, it means that you're, in some cases, allowing these data points to just sync in real time, back and forth, 100% immediately. Okay? We move on to customer settings. So these are just data points. Actually, these are just settings for how customers are managed when they're flowing into the ERP for the first time. So imagine a customer goes to the e-commerce site, they create a customer account, they flow into the ERP. What you're doing is you're telling the system, this is the customer class that they should be assigned to. This is the numbering system that should be used for creating their customer number. This is the location numbering system, okay? Obviously, you could just use any standard settings that are in the ERP already. Some people like to set up unique ones for e-commerce. The last field here is for the guest customer. Now, with BigCommerce, Shopify, lots of e-commerce platforms, they allow customers to check out as guests. And when a customer is checking out, there's 3 different ways that they can do that. They can check out as an anonymous guest, which means that the order is flowing in and the customer information is flowing in with the sales order, but it's just that the person is being associated with one single customer record inside the ERP, meaning that you're not creating a new customer record for every single customer. Okay, that's one option. And in that case, it's going to use this guest customer record inside the ERP. The second option is to allow customers to check out as a guest, but create a customer record for them. So in that case, you're giving them the ability to check out as a guest, which means that they just get to use their email address. They don't have to create an account in order to check out. But behind the scenes, the system's actually creating an account for them. And then in the future, if they, ever try to create an account on their own, then the system will say, oh, you already have an account, just update your password and you can get in. Or secondly, if the customer immediately decides to create an account after the order is placed, then it'll be associated with that customer record. And additionally, if that same customer comes back to the site in the future and they use the same information to check out, their same email address, then their order will be associated with that pre-created customer record that's inside the ERP. Just a little bit of my opinion on this. If I always attempt to push people in the direction of using that setting. From my perspective and from a marketing perspective, it's important to have customer records for all of your buyers. There's so much you can do with that information in the future, whether it's marketing campaigns, understanding buyer habits, looking at analytics about purchases, and understanding customers. There's a lot of great reasons. And everything that I just explained, it can all be configured inside of BigCommerce, and then it'll just use the settings that are here. It's a very easy thing to set up. So I personally, I can't think of a use case where it's appropriate to just dump every single customer into one record inside the ERP. We definitely have customers that do that, but it seems to me that having that marketing power is beneficial. Okay, so I said there were 3 different options. So guest customer, anonymous, guest customer, but we save a customer record. And the third option is to not allow guest customers at all, which means that the customer has to create an account before they can check out. And inside of BigCommerce and other e-commerce platforms, what you can do is you can tell the system, you have to create an account in order to check out, 1. And secondly, if the merchant's team must authorize the account before you allow them to place an order, that's a very popular setting with B2B sellers. If that's the case, then you can configure the system so that they can create an account, your team gets a notification, you decide whether or not they should be allowed to buy from you, and then you either make the account active or inactive, and then they can move forward with purchasing, or maybe they just never get access to the site. Okay. And the other option obviously is create an account, as soon as you have an account, go ahead and buy things. Okay, so let's move on to inventory settings. The first thing, as I mentioned before, BigCommerce requires product categories, and it's not, I was actually surprised to learn this, but it's not uncommon for ERP users or companies using ERPs to not even use sales categories inside the ERP. So in that case, their categories are not, or their products are not organized by these categories. And if they're not organized by categories, we're not going to have anything to push over to BigCommerce. So you have the ability to just create a single sales category and assign it here. And it's essentially a catch-all. What this means is that there's going to be this one sales category that's created in BigCommerce, and every single product is going to be associated with it. And then inside BigCommerce, you can create your product category structure and assign products there. Technically, you can set up a different catch-all for stock items and non-stock items. There's nothing wrong with using the same one for both. Okay. Now we get into availability settings. I've already talked through these, so I won't repeat myself, but just understand that when you're setting the availability settings here, these are the default settings for all products. What I showed you earlier was essentially updating these settings for an individual product. Okay. And then inside the connector settings here, you have the ability to tell the system which availability mode should be used. Items that are available for shipping, or items on hand. And the last thing is warehouses. So, imagine a merchant who owns 3 different warehouses, and within those 3 warehouses, there are multiple locations, and they only want inventory from a specific location in a specific warehouse to be exported to the website for purchases. For one reason or another, they're only going to be shipping e-commerce orders from that specific location. In that case, you have the ability to specify which warehouse that inventory should be coming from. And then additionally, you can drill into the location within that warehouse. Okay. Obviously, you can add as many of these as you like. You could have multiple warehouses. You could have one warehouse with multiple locations. If I were to enter a warehouse here, but not enter a location ID, then the system is just going to use the entire warehouse. Okay. And then for demo purposes, I always just use all. Now we get into the order settings. Obviously, just like everything else, we're setting the default settings for when orders come into the ERP. So the first thing is we're associating the orders with a specific branch. We are associating the incoming orders with a specific sales order. One thing that I want to note here, I mentioned before that online orders and offline orders can be represented inside the BigCommerce system. With this current version, you have to choose which sales order should be appearing inside of the BigCommerce system. So let's say, for instance, you set up just a standard e-commerce order, sales order, and you only use it for incoming orders from BigCommerce. In that case, the orders with this order type, they are the only ones that will appear inside of the My Account area when the customer logs in. But, for instance, sales order, this is the most common order type. If you assign sales order, then anything in the ERP with this order type will appear inside of the BigCommerce admin. Okay. In the future, we are adding the ability to just select multiple order types, but for right now, the setting is to choose one for information that's flowing back and forth. The next thing is the order type, or the return order type. Similar to the order type, you can choose which of the return order types to use. When it comes to discounts are created inside the e-commerce platform. It could be coupon codes, it could be buy one, get one free, promos, or other kinds of discounts. When those discounts flow into the ERP, you can tell them to flow in on the line item, or they could come in on the document level. When this information comes into the ERP, it's represented on the sales order, but just to be clear, it does not import the actual discounts into the ERP discounting engine. Meaning, if you create a coupon code inside of BigCommerce, and that coupon code can be used, the coupon code will be referenced inside the ERP. You'll see it on the sales order, but that coupon code will not be replicated inside of the ERP for use on standard sales orders. Okay, that's something that's on the roadmap for the future, but it's not here in this instance of 2020 R1. The last thing here is the gift certificates. You can configure and use gift certificates on the e-commerce platforms. You have to set up, what this is referencing is a non-stock item inside the ERP, which represents those gift certificates. And then also when we get to payment settings, you'll want to create a payment method inside the ERP that represents gift certificates and then map those two. I'll talk about that more in a second. But gift certificates are supported. Now we jump over to taxes. So with taxes, this is everybody's favorite topic. Taxes are obviously very complicated. And in some cases, businesses are very lucky and they don't have to worry about taxes. So in that case, they don't synchronize anything. In other cases, the merchant wants to manually configure taxes in the e-commerce platform, and they manually want to configure taxes inside the ERP, and they expect the two systems to synchronize. I've only seen this work in environments where the merchant is selling to customers that are very close to them, like within their city or within their region. And the reason is because there's only a handful of tax codes to stay on top of. Okay, because obviously taxes change, and if you had to do this on a nationwide basis, it would be a pretty enormous effort. Okay, so what I've seen most people, when people are selling across the U.S., what I see most people do is they use Synchronize automatically, and what that means is that it's relying on a third-party solution like Avalara or Vertex to handle the taxes. And those taxes are being handled in BigCommerce to calculate the taxes, and then they're also being handled inside the ERP to calculate the taxes on the invoice. Okay. Now we jump over to shipping zones. So in BigCommerce, you can configure lots of different shipping options. You can set up flat rate shipping options. You can integrate with standard carriers like UPS and FedEx. You can even integrate with LTL services. You can set in-store pickup. So what the system is doing is that it's pulling in all of those shipping options from BigCommerce and listing them here. And it does this on a granular level. So if you, let's say for instance, you're using UPS, and UPS has 3 different options that you're using: overnight, 2-day, and ground. The system is going to pull each of those granular options into the ERP, and then you can map them to specific ship vias in the ERP, which is obviously for, to automate things as much as possible. And you can drill deeper. You can associate those shipping options with shipping zones and shipping terms. Only ship vias are required. Now, whenever I set up the demo, I just created a very simple ship via inside of the ERP, and I associated each of these with that one ship via. But you could get more granular. Some people like to see integrations with UPS, and maybe they have negotiated rates with UPS and they just want to make sure that everything's working right. So you might find yourself in a situation where you have to configure that for somebody, or maybe you want to go ahead and add it to your environment and test it out. But what's really important here is that it's possible to map the ship vias with the granular details of those services. Okay, so let's get into payment settings. Similar to the shipping settings, the payment methods that are configured inside of BigCommerce map to the ERP, and you can associate them with payment methods inside the ERP as well. One very important note: BigCommerce does not expose their test payment gateway to the API, which means that when you're setting up a test environment or you have your demo environment, if you place an order on the e-commerce site using their test payment gateway, it's essentially their test credit card gateway, it's not going to send any payment information over to the ERP. So it's just something to keep in mind when you're going through the process of demoing or you're going through the process of testing the system. If you were to configure a test, let's say authorized.net account, that test authorized.net account would send information over to the ERP. So then you can demonstrate the flow of payments and things like that. Okay, and then lastly, if multi-currency is important to you, you're selling to multiple countries, and you have different currencies associated with different payment methods, you could configure that on a granular level here as well. Okay, so once you fill out all these different settings, at that point, data is ready to start flowing between the two systems. Okay, so this is what's required. And I would say, I usually tell people, when someone's implementing the system for the first time, it could take them, let's say, an afternoon to go through the process of setting all this up. But once you get used to it and you get into a rhythm, it's something like, as you'll see, we're kind of running through this whole process in less than an hour. So it becomes pretty quick. But this is the easy part. Everything beyond this is where the challenges and complexities come in, because after we get through all of these steps, that's when the customer needs to start configuring the system for their specific business use cases. Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit. When we go back into the Commerce connector, I'm back in this tab. The first thing let's talk about is the actual flow of data. So as I mentioned before, data can be configured to flow in real time, and you can do that on an entity by entity basis. Meaning, I know my stock items change on a regular basis. Maybe I'm changing prices on my products daily or even hourly. Okay, I could set up a real-time integration with the stock items so that every time something changed in the ERP, it would just export out to BigCommerce. Okay, but let's imagine a scenario where there's a business who's doing 100,000 orders a day, and they know if those sales orders were coming into the ERP in real time, their warehouse would be overwhelmed and they wouldn't be able to process all the orders that are coming in. So instead, they want to do this on a schedule. Every night at midnight or every day at 5 a.m., they want all those sales orders to start flowing into the ERP. You can, in that case, you would use a schedule in order to handle that. And then in other cases, it may be important to handle data flow manually for whatever reason. Maybe the sales categories, maybe you change them every 6 months. So you just go into the system and you would handle that manually. Well, here is where you could turn the real-time integration on and off to be 100% real-time, or you could set a schedule. Okay, and then if we go into these two windows, fetch data and sync data. Like I mentioned before, the connector is essentially a layer that sits on top of the ERP. And when you're fetching data, what you're doing is you're pulling information into the connector. Whether you're pulling it in from the ERP database or you're pulling it in from the e-commerce platform, you're pulling it into the connector. So let's imagine that all of my entities are set on manual right now. And I know that there's new sales orders out on the e-commerce site. I could choose sales order here, hit process. That's going to pull all the sales orders into the connector. And then when I go over to sync data, everything's going to appear here. And then I can either choose individual nodes of data, excuse me, or I could just tell the system process everything. Okay, so you can do that on a granular basis with all the different entities. And then also here in the sync data window, it provides other information like this information is pending. These are links to go directly to the local window representing this thing. Also links to the external window representing, in this case, the customer location. Also the customer here. So you have a lot of control, but this window is not nearly as powerful as, excuse me, the sync status window. So the sync status window, it literally shows you every node of data which has been passed back and forth between the two systems. And you can see here I have a lot of failed nodes of data. This is a system that I've used for testing, and for lots of different things. So I have some failed information. But what's important is that I can see every single node of data that has flowed back and forth between the two systems. If, for instance, if we go into our stock items, I'm going to pull up all. This is going to show me all of the products which are synchronized between the two systems. It'll also show me any products which I've told the system to skip, which you can do by checking off a product and hitting skip. You're telling the system, don't worry about this product. On a deeper level, if for some reason I know there's something wrong with this product, maybe I've noticed that the descriptions aren't in sync and I don't know why, I can just quickly come into the sync status window, check this off, and tell it to sync. It's very hard to think of a use case for this specific detail other than when you're working through implementations. But imagine a scenario where your local product, for one reason or another, is not mapped to the correct product inside of BigCommerce. And there are scenarios where this could possibly happen, but you have the ability to check this item off, click edit, and then from here, you can just update the external ID. You get the external ID by looking at the, if you go into one of the products, we open up in, here, let me grab a good one. Yeah, let's just look at this. So whenever you open up a product inside of BigCommerce, you see this is the product ID here. So you have the ability to just tell the system, map this local product with this external ID. You need to sync it immediately, click OK, and it's done. Okay, so again, this goes back to what I talked about earlier. All of these things can be done without a developer. Okay, in addition to having that level of control, we can jump over to, remember I had all those failed sales orders. Let's just narrow it down to my failed ones. I'm going to do that. And then I scroll over here to the side, and I actually have what I call human readable errors. So e-commerce manager, somebody could log into the system and they could read this information and it would actually make sense to them. Hopefully they would be given the information that they need to drill in deeper and figure out what's going on. Okay, so this is a very powerful window. And my hope is that customers are able to use this window to manage the system as much as possible on their own without having to call on development resources or even partners, if things go sideways. Okay, so the last thing in regards to this information I want to show you is the Commerce sync monitoring. This is essentially a dashboard. So the Commerce edition includes, what happened here? That's fine. Let's just leave. Okay, so this is a dashboard that is included with the Commerce edition. What we imagine is an e-commerce manager logging into the ERP, and maybe this is the first window that they see. It gives them some insight as to everything that's going on. It will alert them to potential problems, or it'll let them know how many orders have come in. Okay, and obviously this dashboard is completely flexible. So there's lots of different general inquiries and small reports that you can create, a lot of visual tools that you can create to understand information in a visual manner. And this dashboard can be configured to match whatever the needs are. Okay. Now, that's everything in regards to synchronizing data back and forth and controlling the data flow. The last thing that I want to show you is the entities window. So the entities window is where you can control data that's flowing back and forth. You can configure which fields of data are flowing back and forth between the two systems. So earlier I was showing you that stock item, and that stock item had two attributes which were unique to that stock item, and they were flowing over to the BigCommerce system. This is where you would set that up. So you're coming in here, you're adding a new row, you're telling the system the information that's in the stock item attributes. These are the two that I want. I need them to auto map to custom fields inside of BigCommerce. And when you do this, it takes care of the rest. You don't even have to go into BigCommerce and create these custom fields. The system will create the custom fields for you, and they'll associate these fields of information on the most appropriate products. you can do this on an entity by entity level. So I've seen other prospects who have, when a customer's creating an account, they ask for additional information. And those fields can be added to the customer record inside of BigCommerce. And then you would map those custom fields to attributes inside of Acumatica. So again, a lot of different control. The last example that I'll give is that description field that I talked about earlier, where the marketing team wants to manage the description on BigCommerce. They don't want to manage it inside the ERP. The entities window is where you would go to unmap those two fields. Okay. And then there's also filtering options. So let's say, for instance, you have 10,000 items in the ERP, but you're only planning to sell 500 of them on the website. You can use the export filtering feature to tell the system exactly which products should be going over to the website. Maybe you base that on sales category. Maybe you base it on a custom field that you set up. There's a lot of different options there. Okay, so that is everything. When it comes to the technical aspects of the connector, that's everything. In addition to this, we could go through the process of actually demoing the product. We can take a look at placing an order on BigCommerce, seeing that order flow into the ERP. You fulfill the order inside the ERP, and then all the shipment information flows back to the BigCommerce system. And of course, it's notifying the customer and doing everything that it should. But from a technical aspect, this is really the engine of the Commerce Connector. Okay, so obviously, if there's any questions about this, don't hesitate to reach out, and I appreciate your attention today. Thank you.